Good heavens. Well, that was cutting it a bit fine, wasn't it? Sorry about that. Just gone midday. And as you can see, this is Midday show, but it is with a slight twist, I might suggest. Not Russ Kane today. He is busy doing Celebrant stuff and all sorts of important things like that. No, however, you got yours truly, me, Phil Dave, with you until 1 o'clock this afternoon. And I am joined, as it is sort of an alternative week, so therefore it is the week he wasn't on last week, for the first part, by the sensational, the marvellous Jonathan Baz. Jonathan, a very good afternoon to you, sir.
Phil, I'm very jealous. Clearly, the outside broadcast team have made it over to your place, but not to mine.
Well, you say they made it over to mine. I'm going to be perfectly honest with you. They very nearly didn't, and so much so. This is not quite finished setting up in the way that I was hoping for, but hey, do you know what? We're going to roll with what we've got instead. And I tell you what I'm going to do. Jonathan, I'm going to ask you to take centre stage and go through your first choice that you have for us, just whilst I finish off one or two little details behind the scenes. So tell us your first selection for today.
Okay, so I've recently been on the road, transatlantic on the road. So I've got a couple of shows to talk about from London, and then a little bit of a chat about what's going on over in the land of Orlando, and aspects of how, and some of my observations and comments on the entertainment world there. But from a London perspective, a show that reopened last week was Just for One Day, the musical about the Live Aid gig that took place in July 1985, shortly after the Band-Aid single had been released in the Christmas some 6 or 7 months before. This show opened last year initially, the early parts of 2024, at the Old Vic. And it went down an absolute storm there. Very, very, very well received. A show that's very, very cleverly put together. And so it has returned this time to the West End, where it is now playing at the Shaftesbury Theatre. Quite a few of the original cast from the Old Vic remain in place. One, most notably, is an actor called Craig Else, who assumes the Bob Geldof role, giving us the narrative and the talk and the spiel of what led up to Band-Aid, what had led up to Live Aid. All of the characters that those of us who were around back in the day remember it. And Phil, probably you were not even a speck of an.
Yes. Do you want me to answer that? I'm afraid 1985 was 1 year before I existed. Sorry.
No, I'd have thought the gap was longer. You've aged extremely well.
Oh, you are too kind, sir. But
so, for those of us that remember the characters of the day, there was Bob, there was Midday, who were the two driving forces. Harvey Goldsmith, a massive impresario and promoter of tours and concerts, was brought on board to make the whole thing happen. And what the show does is very much boil together quite a few of some of those massive songs, and of course, Just for One Day being a lyric from the gosh, was it Simple Minds? Oh God! Excuse my ignorance there.
I don't know. You've caught me short there. I don't know.
It's a classic lyric. We can all hear it ringing around our heads. That's the lyric that titles the show. Maggie Thatcher gets a passing reference, clearly, obviously, as the Prime Minister at the time, with Bob Geldof making assorted pleas to her. And when the press launch for this West End opening was convened at Wembley Stadium, no less, a couple of months ago in May. Of course, it is the new Wembley Stadium now, and the original Live Aid took place in the old Wembley
Julie
Stadium.
Voice has told us it's a lyric from Heroes from David Bowie.
Thank you. There we go.
Yeah.
Please, please, please excuse my ignorance, of which there is no limit. Um,
Not in the world of
really,
theatre, though. There
it's
is very
vast.
much.
It's
Yeah.
vast. It's believe me, it's vaster than anyone can imagine. The press launch was at Wembley a couple of months ago, and it was fun to trot out there and have a look at the turf and whatever, and listen to Bob and Midge and indeed Harvey Goldsmith, who were there talking about the show. And in fact, I spoke with Bob myself, managed to stay off matters political of the current era, which was probably the most
I suspect that was probably for a good reason.
Yes, yes, probably sound. And we kept
For
the
the best.
conversation very much focused on Live Aid, Band Aid. And he, to be fair, Live Aid, Band Aid was his and Midge's baby. He has been very, very involved with the stage show throughout. And he did describe it. And I have to say, it was one of these rare occasions where I completely agreed with Bob Geldof that this is the ultimate jukebox musical, because the show really was a jukebox of the great pop stars of that era, rolling up one after the other, in fact, on both sides of the Atlantic, because there was a concert that took place on Wembley Stadium, and a few hours later in Philadelphia, the American version of Live Aid kicked off. And Phil Collins, Phil, your namesake, Phil, you may or may
Oh,
not know that.
I can actually go one step better. I went to the same school. I went to the same school as Phil Collins, not at the same time, I'm hastened to add, but I did go to the same school as him. But you know what? I think Phil Collins is honestly one of the greatest musicians to come out of the 80s, and I think I know he's not underrated, but I don't think he's as rated as he should be.
I agree with you. He on that day achieved the remarkable feat, assisted by British Airways and Concorde, of he played a set at Wembley Stadium, then with the help of the Metropolitan Police escorting him to, or probably even by helicopter to Heathrow, I don't know, jumped on a Concorde and played Philadelphia on the same day.
Wow!
It was
wow!
It was memorable. And in fact, only this week, just talking about Phil Collins, and I mentioned earlier, having recently been in Orlando in the land of the theme parks, where a couple of the firework displays that we were present at in the evenings had included as background music, You'll Be in My Heart from Tarzan, a beautiful Phil Collins creation. And I just want to touch on a bit later about sort of some of these Disney composers. But yeah, that is just for one day. Booking now for quite a few months at the Shaftesbury Theatre.
I had a friend of mine, a good friend of mine, who's also got very similar taste in music, and he went to go and see that, and he was absolutely raving about it and has said I absolutely must go. So I will make the effort to go and see it. Unfortunately, my work hours have changed, which means going to the theatre is not quite as often as it used to be. But that definitely is something I have every intention.
The cast are brilliant. There's not really anyone hugely famous actor-wise. There's just a raft of absolutely brilliant talent that's delivering the show. The director is, and I'm just going to click on this. The director is, and I know him well, I just can't remember his name, Luke Shepherd. Luke, who's got a very, very deft hand at directing stage musicals. He knows musicals inside out. I believe he's also the director of the revival of the Starlight Express that's playing at Wembley, which for all one may have criticisms of some of the musical tinkering that's gone on there.
Yeah, so I was going to say, I mean, that hasn't endeared me, but yeah.
Have you seen it?
I've seen the new version of Starlight
Express. You have seen
Express.
The new version. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. I can't help but think that it was a very look. I get what they've tried to do. They've obviously tried to make it appeal to quite a woke audience, basically. But I think it's a terrible shame because the original didn't really need tinkering with. Having said that, the true original was tinkered with in the late 80s, early 90s by Lloyd Webber himself when he actually sort of did the next version of Starlight Express. And actually that one wasn't terrible. So it is, I guess, an ever-changing and ever-developing musical. But I just personally think it's lost a lot of the essence.
Luke, however, does know how to direct a show. He very much is the man of the moment on musical direction, and he's done a good job with Just for One Day. The other show that I've been able to have, or my team has been able to set eyes on in the last couple of weeks, is the latest Matthew Bourne opening. It's a revival of the Midnight Bell. Currently at Sadler's Wells, playing there, really playing at Sadler's Wells until tomorrow before it continues on tour. So to be fair, if you wanted to go and see it, just click on the Midnight Bell or go Google it and you'll find where the tour dates are. And all credit to Matthew Bourne, who believes very strongly in taking his shows on the road and making them accessible to wider audiences. To be fair, they start off or Sadler, either at Sadler's Wells or Sadler's Wells features heavily in the tour, maybe 1 or 2 months in. And whilst Sadler's Wells tickets are not as sometimes the best prices are not as affordable as a regional theatre, they are certainly far more reasonably priced than West End top price tickets. So in that respect, Bourne's approach to making his shows accessible to a wider audience is really to be encouraged. The Midnight Bell, the choreography is gorgeous and, of course, imaginative from Sir Matthew. It's inspired by the novels of Patrick Hamilton, and it's a set of stories woven around the murky world of 1930s Soho. Les Brotherston, who is the set designer, who absolutely works hand in hand with Matthew Bourne. The two of them are almost inseparable when it comes to direction or choreography from Bourne, and set design from Les Brotherston. And again, his design work is wonderful, very evocative. Paulie Constable does the lighting, and on this instance lets one down a little bit because too much of the show is plunged into gloom, and it's actually not that easy to see what's going on. So it's not the best of Matthew Bourne, to be honest. There's stuff that he's done that frankly I have raved about and been stunned by.
At the same time, I'd argue that there's something very suspicious about someone who gets it right every single time.
Yep. Yeah, that's a fair comment. But he's responsible for directing the current Oliver that's in the West End, and is packing them in month after month, and again in a set that's designed by Les Brotherston. So that partnership continuing. Have you seen that production of Oliver?
I was just going to say, I have yet to see the new. I'm telling you, it's terrible. All of these things I want to go and see, and I've really not made the time to go and see them because of work.
Yeah.
But I rest assured, my intention is to change that in the coming months. I know that doesn't help us with this particular, but I am very much keen to go and see it. And again, I've heard nothing but rave reviews about it.
Absolutely. It's Matthew Bourne at his very best. And to be fair, also a fair old dose of Cameron Mackintosh in the structuring of that show.
Then how could you possibly go wrong?
Because Cameron has an absolute love affair for all sorts of reasons with Oliver, the show. And his fingerprints are all over it. And it's a glorious night at the theatre. Matthew Bourne's best. The Midnight Bell, not necessarily Matthew Bourne's best, but if you enjoy Bourne's work, take a look on the website, see where it's playing, and it certainly makes for a stimulating night at the theatre. That wraps up my observations on live openings and live shows for the last couple of weeks, of those that I've been able to see. There will be more coming in the future, of course. We've got Hercules literally about to open in the West End. But what
do you think about that? I mean, I know that you were saying about going into Disney stuff in a moment, but what do you make of the idea of taking these? I don't know, because I know it worked for Lion King, but I'm in a level with you. I don't think it's worked for anything else Disney's tried. I really don't.
So it's an interesting one, isn't it? So we'll take, for example, Beauty and the Beast. which I think did work well on stage. Disney, okay, now to be fair, what Disney do on their live show of Beauty and the Beast, which is at Disney's Hollywood Studios, that theme park, the show lasts for half an hour. And there's no bad thing sometimes in stripping down a 2-hour movie into just the half-hour songs. There's another gig at another theme park.
Is that all you could stomach?
In the Disney domain in Epcot? They have a Beauty and the Beast sing-along, which I will confess, dear listeners, I found irresistible. And there are, if only it was in a gloriously air-conditioned, very plush cinema. Luckily, only seated about two. It wasn't a massive cinema auditorium, but very plushly laid out, with seated about 200 people max. And there they've trimmed it down to 15 minutes, where literally it snatches of the greatest songs from Beauty and the Beast, in which you're all invited, and singing along is positively encouraged. The words are up there on the screen. There is an Angela Lansbury, or as good as Angela Lansbury voice, that whizzes one through the story. And then as she pauses for breath, a song takes over and people join in with the words that they've known and loved.
I can't imagine you could sing many songs in 15 minutes, especially not from Beauty and the Beast. I don't
Well,
know
they do truncate. I don't know how well you know Beauty and the Beast.
I can't deny it was quite a big part of my childhood. So
Fine.
I
Okay. So you've got that opening song as Belle, Good Morning Belle, as she's walking through the village. To be fair, they chop that song immensely, which is a great shame, because I enjoy that song hugely. I think it's very funny.
Although there is a very, very strange opening lyric to that I have never understood. I never will do, and for as long as I live. Little town, it's a quiet village. Well, it's either a town or a village. Which is it?
Oh, that's one for well, no, it can't be one for Howard Ashman, because sadly he's no longer with us. Because the songs for Beauty and the Beast were written by composer Alan Menken, lyricist Howard Ashman. He died tragically young. So unfortunately he's not around to answer that question. But
Wow.
it is a good question. But you
Just
be our guest. No, it's a spot on. Be Our Guest is there in full resplendent glory. Beauty and the Beast with the Angela Lansbury singing lead. Oh God, yeah, having said that, I'm just trying to think, what were the other songs in there? I don't know, whatever ones they were, I thoroughly enjoyed them all. Yeah, it left me.
Well, I mean, I guess Tale as Old as Time is probably.
Yes, well, Beauty and the Beast. That is. Hello, are you there? Hello, Phil. Phil, I think you're.
Hello.
Yeah.
Did I freeze?
I think so. Yes. We lost connection with the satellite.
Oh dear.
Well, you're back now.
I have a horrible feeling this might be something to do with the heat. My laptop might be going into overload. But hey,
no. But you're thoroughly back there, and you also appear to be perfectly synchronized as well.
Oh, thank God for that. Well, there's a start.
Indeed. But what really struck me, though, as I say, on different points of being in these Disney parks, was the impact of some of the really big composers. And of course, the biggest is John Williams. Now, okay, the Jaws ride is no more at Universal. But as I wandered
that's
through...
a shame.
It is a shame. Equally, Back to the Future has been scrapped as well, if you remember that ride.
No, I didn't know that. That's terrible.
It's been scrapped.
No.
Yep. However, in Islands of Adventure, Jurassic Park lives on after however many years it's been taking people on its boat ride around its meta theme park within a theme park. And next door to Jurassic Park is the Harry Potter world in Islands of Adventure. These, of course, are Universal franchises rather than Disney franchises, but you've got John Williams' fingerprints all over them. And the music that this guy writes and his ability to translate story and narrative into melody is, I wouldn't say unmatched. That's too strong and superlative to hang on him, but it is the best of the best. Because his melodies, on a far more darker and somber note, if some of the stuff he's done for Spielberg things like Schindler's List, which of course is not a theme park attraction by any means, but his ability to evoke the narrative of a story through a melody that is distinct, recognizable, almost telling the story on its own context is just really, really strong. And the day before we'd been at Islands of Adventure, which is the Universal Park, we'd been at another Disney park, the Hollywood Studios, where there's a great little tribute to Star Wars with some fabulous rides. And of course, John Williams has done the music for that. So he straddles so many of the studios, so many of the great directors. It's not all Spielberg, because of course Star Wars was George Lucas back in the day when the franchise began. And it's just a huge talent. I touched on.
You could say when it comes to music, he straddles various.
Yeah.
It's an island reference to the kids.
Yes, indeed. Yes, I picked that one up at Strand Varieties. Yeah. Sorry, that's another old one. But I never knew you were such a good fiddler.
Oh, good God! Yes, that's why I'm on the roof.
Boom, boom.
I keep going until I find one you like. I don't care.
So of course, coming up on the rails close behind John Williams is of course Hans Zimmer.
Now there's a composer.
Indeed, very much of the next. John Williams, gosh, late 80s now. Hans Zimmer, considerably younger than that. I think, considerably in his 60s. And there's a really, really nice touch, of course, with the Pirates of the Caribbean franchise. Because Pirates of the Caribbean movie franchise that starred Johnny Depp with music that was scored by Hans Zimmer and a wonderfully memorable, adventure-packed melody that underlies that film, that of where in a theme park most of the rides have been inspired by the movies. When it comes to Pirates of the Caribbean, you have a movie franchise that was in fact inspired by the Disney ride, which not a lot of people know. And for those of you who are familiar with your Disney parks, Pirates of the Caribbean was a really very charming, gentle boat ride round animated puppets of who were singing "Yo ho, yo ho, a pirate's life for me." Very much in the same style as taking the boat ride around It's a Small World, where you'd hear that Sherman Brothers composition, It's a Small World After All, which has achieved global recognition and popularity. So Pirates of the Caribbean, as I say, stemmed from a very harmless, charming amusement park ride. From there, someone very clever looked and said, "You know what? We can make a movie out of this." And not only did they make a movie, they made 3 or 4 movies out of the franchise. Zimmer wrote the music for the films. His music does now appear in the rides as you go around them, and it's it's just a very, very, for those of us old enough to appreciate the nostalgia of the moment, the way in which that ride has been developed into a movie franchise is quite charming. Hans Zimmer, though, doesn't have the same footprint onto the. Oh, you're back indoors.
I have had to go back indoors. Unfortunately, my machine was overheating. So for anyone who had to quickly make a swap change over to the other machine. However, I have heard every single word. And I have to tell you that, when you were saying about the Sherman Brothers there, and in fact, actually, it was only, I think Richard Sherman only died a couple of years ago.
Indeed, yeah.
And I can't get over how different so many childhoods could have been had it not been for that amazing combination of the Sherman Brothers and Walt Disney. It's just mind-blowing how many lives that they have actually touched.
Yep, I'd quite agree. The soundtracks, you know, the Sherman Brothers. You think of the early ones, you think of Jungle Book, you think of Jungle Book, and then it's not even Disney, because then when you think of things like Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, which pure Sherman, but of course produced by Eon, people who did James Bond, because Ian Fleming, of course, created Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. And again, you know, the Shermans are there. But you're right, their fingerprints are all over the not so much the childhoods of the children of today, but you know, Mary Poppins, the Jungle Book, Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, such a huge impact of songs and melodies that are just so recognizable, and so clever in the way that they put their harmonies together, and very often writing the lyrics as well. You know, you've got something like The Lion King, which of course was probably the biggest blockbuster of a Disney movie to then hit that new era, which of course was Elton John and Tim Rice. And you know, since then it's been, you know, more, you know, we touched on Phil Collins with Tarzan. There's been a more eclectic set of musicians who've scored the Disney films going forward. You know, Alan Menken, I think, should be probably remembered more on the show's framework for his contribution. Menken is a very clever guy, and someone who's yet really to be appearing on the theme park side of things is Stephen Schwartz, though I'm reliably informed that Wicked could be making an appearance in the Universal Park that's being opened in England in a few years' time. Because
how delightful.
Tisk. Because he, of course, was responsible for Hunchback of Notre Dame. There were all these Parisian-y type Disney cartoons, which, you know, the Beauty and the Beast, Hunchback of Notre Dame. France had quite an impact on the Disney storytellers.
Absolutely, as did London, really, if you think about it. 101 Dalmatians, obviously set in London. Basil of Baker Street was also there. In what else is there? There's Peter Pan is, of course, set in London. There's quite a few.
That
London does sort of feature.
Mary Poppins and Angela Lansbury,
of course,
Beauty
Mary
and the
Poppins,
Beast.
yeah.
Angela Lansbury is, of course, the quintessential, you know, Mrs. Potts from that movie in Australia. And you know, it's very interesting, as we took our seats for that, it was an English voice that voiced over the intro to the Beauty and the Beast experience. And then, of course, you get to The Lion King, and it's Jeremy Irons with his who's voicing the voice of evil, with Scar. You know, the role of the English voice in the Disney movie is an interesting one, because, of course, in the Jungle Book, it was he was Shere Khan. It was George Sanders who gave the voice to Shere Khan, another gorgeously refined English voice playing the baddie. So, you know, I think
come to think of it, maybe they don't like the English very much.
Well, quite. Right. I think maybe old Walt was out to settle a few scores.
Although I do have to say, though, Jeremy Irons is responsible for one of my favorite Disney songs ever, which is, when he's not responsible, but he sang it anyway. I sort of sang it anyway. It was "Be Prepared" from The Lion King. I just think that the way that that's written is blooming brilliant. So, even though I know it's a very underrated song, but I just think it's
that's where you're so refined and cultured, whereas I'm quite happy with Hakuna Matata from that show, which just sort of
nothing wrong with that. I think you'll find you're the majority. So there's obviously something wrong with me, but anyway,
it appeals to my more base instinct. But it's all very, very clever, witty stuff. And as I say, what just struck me, particularly on that one day, walking from one park, Jurassic Park, into the ride next door of Harry Potter, both scored by John Williams, and you just think to yourself, God, you know, this guy has written these tunes that are so memorable, so stuck in my mind. What a genius. So that's what I've got to say for myself. And
How utterly superb. Thank you very much indeed, as always. So you're back on in a couple of weeks, are you?
I'll be back in a couple of weeks, and bless my soul, I'll be talking about Hercules then.
See what you did there. Superb.
Well,
all right. Well, thank you very much indeed, Jonathan. Much appreciated. Have yourself a splendid rest of the week.
And to you.
And we shall see you soon. Farewell. Jonathan Bass there with some theatrical recommendations. Now, as you can see, I have moved back inside, and I've just seen how terrible the wardrobe's open. So you've got a background of some clothes going on there. That's very scruffy of me. I can only apologise any odd way. So it's very simple. I think it's just you and me now for the rest of the show, because if my memory serves me right, well, Chantal's normally here 5 minutes to spare, and if my memory serves me right, I think she's away this week, and obviously Russ is away as well. I'm really very, very keen to stress that I don't believe that they are away together, because I know that Russ is doing Celebrant duties, and I don't actually know where Chantal is. Maybe she's enjoying the sunshine. Maybe that's what that is. But any odd way, one way or another, hopefully you'll stick it out with me until 1 o'clock this afternoon. And it's a great pleasure to be with you, because however glorious the weather is, and I am extraordinarily disappointed that I couldn't stay outside and enjoy that weather whilst I was having a chat with you. The truth is that it was getting a bit hot for the old machine, and I'm afraid that my computer might have started to overheat. Hence the reason you may have spotted earlier on that the signal started glitching here and there, any odd way. Now, look, it's not normally the case that at this time of the show, we would start to get serious or ramp up anything. But I do think that it is worthwhile having a chat with you about the situation that we find ourselves in at the moment, because I don't know whether or not I've just been burying my head in the sand, or whether or not I've been expecting it, or just sort of almost graciously accepting it. It seems like a lot of people are scared at the moment. I think that's a fair analysis. A lot of people feel scared. A lot of people think that there is obviously something very unpleasant in the air, which I think we can all agree with that. But they feel worried about what's coming next. And I wondered whether or not if you do as well. Is that something that you're feeling at the moment? Are you, dare I ask, are you scared for what's going to happen with the world? Because even though I know that that might sound a bit of a dramatic way of putting it, I don't think that there are many people who don't feel sort of maybe at the very least nervous about it. Because look, for me, I don't think worried yet, but I can understand why. I can understand why people are. I can understand why people are nervous. I get that. I think that sort of because we're kind of a bit sheltered here at the moment, we're okay. And I'm, of course, talking about the situation in Iran and the threat that they're making to the West, and that we can get into the ins and outs of whether or not the right thing to do was to try and go in and attack Iran. I do think it was right. I personally believe that it was absolutely the correct move to make, because you see, this has been bubbling up for years, absolutely, and it's not even decades, I'd say, because since the so-called revolution in Iran, the change to that country, and I've not necessarily been to Iran, but I'm certainly talking about photographic evidence and video evidence and people who I know who are Iranian and what they have said. It's really quite unnerving, to say the least, because you've got a regime who ultimately believes in such prehistoric nonsense, believe it so vehemently that they are prepared to kill their own people and anyone who disagrees with them. And to make it worse, is they are prepared themselves to die in the name of so-called martyrism. And you can't reason with that. It's impossible. How can you make an ultimate threat to an individual, to a nation, to a people? Actually, I say people, that's not fair. I don't think it's all Iranians. Far from it. I know it's not all Iranians. But how can you make a threat to an ideology where the threat that would be worrying to you and I is seen as a reward? It's not possible. Those just don't go hand in hand. And as a result of it, I understand why people are a bit freaked out by it. Kimi Lashmal says, but everyone thinks they are the good guys. Well, you see, I don't think they think they're the good guys, but they only see what they can comprehend. They see one country attacking another country. Now, what the reasons are for attacking those countries are almost irrelevant, and that's kind of the problem. They see it as irrelevant, and therefore it's the reason why they believe Israel are the bad guys, which I think anyone with half a brain knows they're not, and why they believe that Iran are the victims in all of this. Now, the problem you've got is that, I mean, there are so many factors here, let's be honest, but you've got Western values being used to interpret a situation in the Middle East that is already an unusual situation that is then somehow being interpreted back to what we believe in the West, even though that it's anti-West that is fueling this saga. So in other words, let me explain. I know that's a bit wordy, but let me explain. You've got Iranian regime that is obviously very anti-West, attacking a country that they feel threatened by, and they attack them through proxies so that it distracts from the true perpetrators. In other words, they use Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, all of that lot to do their dirty work for them, because they don't want people to realize Iran is the perpetrator, is the bad guy in all of this. Israel obviously knows Iran is the bad guy in all of this, and as a result of it, they go in quite rightly, after they've weakened the proxies, to attack the so-called head of the snake. But in doing so, because the world has not been exposed to the idea of Iran being the ones who's funding and fueling all of this ghastly nonsense towards Israel, and actually, can we just be honest, for goodness sake, towards Israel, towards Jews, for crying out loud, towards Jewish people, and to Westerners, infidels as they call them. Because the world has not seen Iran be responsible for this, because they've sort of hidden in plain sight, suddenly it's making Israel look like the bad guys in all of this. But they do that because they're judging on Western values. In other words, how anti-West to go and attack in someone else's country. That's kind of why, when October the 7th happened, for a very brief moment, Israel were rightly seen as the victim in all of this, is because they saw a country that had been invaded, been attacked by people who were scary, and who obviously knew no boundaries in terms of their hatred and their evil. And yet, people, for the first time, I think, in my lifetime, saw what most Israelis and what most Jews and most allies of Israel around the world have been saying for a very long time. And that is that it's under constant attack, constant threat. And it finally happened. But it's only because Israel, for one very bizarre reason, let their guard down. Now, had they not have let their guard down, maybe October the 7th would never have happened. Now, you and I could go into the ins and outs as to why it even happened in the first place. I've absolutely no flipping idea. I have my own suspicions. I can't really sort of prove anything, but I do think it's very odd that a country with the most superb military in the world, let's be honest, let its guard down for that amount of time and allowed an attack to happen. How? That doesn't make sense at all. But anyway, I mean, look, it's technically neither here nor there. I'm not really interested in whether or not there was something that sort of happened deliberately or not. That's slightly irrelevant now. The point is that we are where we're at. And the Western world needs to wake up before it's too late. And that's not me trying to scaremonger. I just think it's fact. I can't really see it any other way. Iran openly states that after they've finished the job with Israel, which, by the way, they never will, they'll come after America. And when they're finished with America, which they never will, they'll come after Britain. Why does anyone want to reason with someone like that? How can you reason with someone like that? Dave Sleet says, in the West, there is almost a fear to act and a fear of failure, which is creating a failure to act. Oh my God, superb summary as ever. I'm really sorry I couldn't summarize it so brilliantly, but Dave, thank you. You're absolutely right. I think it's actually because the West knows that we are militarily speaking, I should say, very, very vulnerable. We have spent so many years blindsided by the notion of being in peacetime, when actually the world has been bubbling up for a long time. First sign of any trouble, we should have been bolstering the armed forces, not weakening them. And the fact that we've had successive governments who think they can make cuts to the armed services, and never mind, by the way, about the percentage of GDP that goes into defense, okay, that means nothing, right? That is not repairing the damage that has been done. It's exactly the same, by the way, as with the police and the way we've seen the police services cut and cut and cut. What we've witnessed is the removal of trained personnel from all of these walks of life over the years and replaced with nothing. And that is why we're vulnerable. That is why we're weak. Now, technically speaking, America, thankfully, hasn't been that short-sighted. But if it weren't for America being our closest ally, we would be right royally stuffed. And I'm going to level with you. I actually think that's the only reason that this country hasn't been attacked sooner. And I mean attacked on a grand scale, rocket fire and stuff like that, is because of America and because of NATO. And even though I don't believe in the concept of a global army by any stretch of the imagination, I never have done and never will do. It was one of the reasons why I very happily saw the back of the European Union, is the thought of a European army scared the hell out of me. You just don't need that kind of instruction coming from elsewhere in the world. What we need is to rapidly start building up people's love of this country to the point where they are prepared to fight for its survival. Because there's two trains of thought here. First one being is otherwise all those who made the ultimate sacrifice during the world wars did it for nothing. To be honest, I kind of think they did anyway. And number two is that how can we possibly expect to save the country if we are being trained, even subliminally trained, to hate it? Of course, people aren't going to stand by this country. And all that's going to happen is those who believe in their revolting ideology that they're trying to inflict on the West. And you'll note that I am deliberately not saying anything to do with Islam, because to me, that doesn't symbolize, that doesn't represent Muslims. In my humble opinion, Muslims are the peacekeepers. The fundamentalists use Islam as an excuse to carry out what they do. And the West is stupid enough to fall for the disguise because they say, oh, they're Muslim, we can't offend them. No, they're not Muslims at all. They're fundamentalists. And the sooner we start distinguishing the difference between the two, the sooner we can actually start dealing with the problem. To my mind's eye, it is literally no difference than someone saying that, heaven forbid, they have, say, lung cancer and a bad cough. And I'm sorry to use such an extreme example, and I also apologize to anyone who is going through that. But this is the kind of stupidity we're talking about here. Because as soon as someone acknowledges that they have got cancer, quite rightly, the treatment that is relevant starts. But if you dismiss it and say it's only a cough, then you're not getting the right treatment. And that's the situation we find ourselves in now, is that we have a major, deadly problem facing the West. Really, really major problem. No doubt about it. There are people who openly hate this country. and yet they live here. And worse still, these people are entitled to all the same benefits that those of us who are hardworking taxpayers get. We're funding people to hate us. This is the stupidity. This is where we're at. And I personally can't get my head around how successive governments have either been burying their heads in the sand over this, are too scared to deal with it, or they don't see it. And either way, that doesn't shower any of them in glory. The very people we put in place to protect us and to run the country are running it into the ground. Andy Lucas. Good afternoon, Phil. 100% agree with you. Thanks, Lady Lucas. I thought you might. Dave Sleet. We are militarily dependent on allies that are weak, but we have also undermined our civil infrastructure and allowed a fragmentation of social connectivity that any enemy of a culture will use to create division. And I think actually that's been born out of that age-old ruling process of divide and conquer. I think that's all that's happened. Is it's convenient for politicians to separate us, because for as long as we're infighting, which I know no one's like properly infighting at the moment, but let's make no mistake, that's what they want us to ultimately do. I've never thought that this country would ever enter civil war, and I'm quite convinced that we're closer than we've ever been to that. The more that we infight, the better distraction for that shower in the House of Commons. And by the way, I'm not talking about any particular party. I think about this on both sides of the fence, on all sides of the fence to some degree. I can't get my head around how we have allowed politicians to be that selfish and that stupid that they sacrifice this country for their own greed and their own benefit. It's completely outrageous. And there are people who have said that they wish that the king would intervene. Now, constitutionally, if you like, before anyone says anything, this country does have a constitution. It's just not as monumental or as important as American constitution. The constitution of this country doesn't really count for very much, in the sense that you don't have the king who is ultimately in charge. For all intents and purposes, we have been divvying up power for so many years that no one's truly in control. And I think this is where a major problem lies. You've got this ridiculous situation where the House of Lords has been as good as abolished. Okay, and let me explain why I say that. It was abolished when hereditary peers were axed, because it no longer became the House of Lords. It was just the house for former MPs and friends of MPs who disagree with everything. That's all it's become. So the House of Lords becomes this stumbling block that stifles everything. So we don't make any progression with anything, because they start off with a bill in the Commons, vote for it to progress, then it goes to the Lords, Lords suggest an amendment, back to the Commons, Commons disagree with the amendment, vote it down. Just all of this nonsense. No one is taking charge. No one is actually making definitive decisions that they can turn around and they can say, this is how we're going to do things. And if you don't like it, tough. Shouldn't have voted for us. Because it's not democracy if nothing happens. It's just a disaster. Andy Lucas, how many mayors are not British born and therefore not really fighting for Great Britain, which is unfortunately not great anymore? I think we can all agree it's not great anymore, sadly. Kimmy Lashmore, Scandinavia have the idea, but why is Britain so important these days? I don't think Britain is important anymore. That's the problem. I think the Britain that we all knew and love has just been ebbed away, given away in some parts piecemeal. This situation we've got with the Chagos Islands, I don't know if you've been following this, but this was one of the first moves by this latest bunch of morons who are governing us. The Chagos Islands were given back to the Philippines. And it was done so on the basis of no reimbursement to us, even though we owned the land, technically. But instead, what we're doing is we are giving money to them now in order to be able to still have access to it. So that is the same as giving a house away to somebody and then asking the person you've given it to, can I rent it from you? That is the level of stupidity we're talking about. It's just insane. Absolutely insane. And it's not Philippines, it's Mauritius. But even so, I just can't, for the life of me, get my head around that level of lunacy. Strategically speaking, where Chagos is was a really important military base for this country. And as we start to hurtle more and more towards a third world war, and can we have a grown-up conversation here about it? This is what's happening. We know it is. It couldn't be more obvious if we're not already in it. We just probably don't call it that yet. I don't think they call World War II for a very long time. Everyone sort of said it started with Germany invading Poland, but it had been bubbling up a little bit before then. But for us to give away a piece of land that, strategically speaking, would have been incredibly beneficial to us, had conflict sort of escalated to a degree where we need a base in that part of the world, is just lunacy. But then again, having said that, I don't really think we've ever been governed by people who are, well, not for a long time anyway, governed where common sense prevails. Linda Dave, aka my mother. Andy, I don't think it's even Britain anymore, let alone great. To say it, I think you got a point. It certainly doesn't remind me of the country I grew up in. And I know there are going to be some people who are saying, what the hell do you possibly remember about Great Britain? You're only late 30s. You don't remember the golden age of it. No, you're right. I don't remember it, but I'm aware of it. But I would also point out that in the early 90s, and actually for most of the 90s, really, this country might have been starting to disintegrate slightly under Major, but it was still ultimately Britain, and it still was ultimately a good country to live in. But now, just unrecognizable. I actually said on a program I was on last night that the only way I can describe it is that we're basically sort of being we're rotting from within. We have allowed the most unrecognizable level of immigration on the basis of trying to sort of almost do this revolting experiment of multiculturalism, globalism, if you like. And there are those on the left who say, well, it serves us right for the number of countries we invaded over the centuries. Well, I've never invaded anywhere. I've literally never invaded anywhere in my life, and I don't think I know anyone who has. Not in this day and age. So if you're going to start sort of saying, historically, this country invaded, yeah, maybe it did. But it hasn't done recently. So that's like saying the Germany of today should be punished for the actions of the Nazis. That makes no sense at all. You don't punish the people who've not actually done anything. Multiculturalism has totally and utterly failed. It's not possible. It stands to reason. You can't have one culture, for example, this was off the back of the discussion of the grooming gangs, by the way, or rape gangs, as most people are calling them now, because they know that's what they are. But you can't have a culture who thinks it is in any way acceptable to groom a child and then abuse them sexually, assimilated into a culture that quite rightly thinks that is nothing short of disgusting and that the perpetrator should probably have parts of their anatomy removed. Those don't go hand in hand. It's not possible. So how do we expect that kind of multiculturalism to work? It's never going to. Ever. And it shouldn't. Now, I think that people forget multiculturalism is not the same as multiracialism. There's been for a very long time way more than just Christianity in this country, but it is first and foremost a Christian country. And as someone who is Jewish, I respect that enormously. I have a great deal of understanding towards the holiest times of the years for this country, namely Easter and Christmas. I respect that tradition. And frankly, I think anyone who doesn't shouldn't be allowed to call this place home. Because what more of an insult can you show to a country who is good enough to allow you to live within than to say, well, I want to live here, but I don't want to be like you. I don't want to believe in what you believe. I don't want to live the way you have done for hundreds, if not thousands of years. I can't think of anything more revolting. How disrespectful. And what's worse is that we encourage people with a system that states that anyone who comes here is entitled to the same as those who've been paying into the tax system for a great number of years. Now, I would have thought one of the most obvious ways to try and encourage people to assimilate and actually really prove that they want to be a part of this country is to say across the board, regardless of who you are, where you come from, and that includes British people, 5 years of paying into the tax system before you see any of the benefits from it. Period. Why the hell should I, as a hardworking taxpayer, be paying for people who's never put a penny into it? That's not fair. My taxes are going up to fund these cretins. That makes me sick. The cost of living is astronomical. And frankly, I'm actually sort of for the first time ever in my working life thinking that I'm about to have to make sacrifices because I can't quite afford my lifestyle. I don't live a very lavish lifestyle. Okay, I mean, I like nice things. Who doesn't? But I'd like to think that I'm relatively grounded, relatively middle of the road. But yet I'm the one who's going to have to start sort of making cuts just so that I don't go into debt for it. Whereas this could all be very easily avoided if property prices were more in line with wages, but they're not, because wages have been undercut for decades because of cheap labor that's been imported. House prices have gone sky high because of demand. All of this doesn't add up, doesn't go together. So British people are the ones who are making the ultimate sacrifice just so that people who can't be bothered to do anything can live a better life. How does that make sense? Kimmy Lashmar, agree, but where in the world is the best place to be? Who knows? I don't think the world is very nice at all, to be honest, at the moment. I think there are other countries I'd rather be than the UK, but, fortunately my friends and family here and I won't leave them behind. My mother, it was ultimately Tony Blair who started this ridiculous situation. Dave Sleet says it goes back further than Tony Blair. The failure to stand by and protect social and cultural inclusion was an 80s phenomenon, allowing communities to self-segregate and avoid assimilation was the breeding ground for the breakdown. Andy Lucas, agree. We have completely bent over to facilitate those who don't want to celebrate Christmas or Easter. Now they want to take away benefits for the sick. It's unbelievable. Absolutely unbelievable. Well, look, I don't know whether or not we've solved very much in this hour or this half hour, but that is sadly all the time we've got. But I do thank you very much indeed for the pleasure of your company. Russ will be back on Monday, as usual. And until next time, see you soon. Thanks for your comments and your company. Bye.